Before I even begin, yes, I meant what the title says. No, it's not a joke, and I fully believe this game is really amazing. Obviously it has flaws, but this game definitely has way more great things than negative ones. It's not even a competition. So, let's get into it. I'm ESF1, and here's why I think Super Meat Boy Forever is awesome. Oh, an obvious spoiler warning because I'm going to cover everything, even though the spoiler embargo has already subsided, so viewer discretion is advised. For this video, I'll be dividing into 3 separate sections based on the 3 integral aspects of the game. The overall story, art, and presentation will be up first as the appetizer. Next will be the main course, which is the gameplay, and while most infamous for its difficulty, I'll also be discussing the level design during that section too. Lastly, I want to dedicate a section to the music and fan service as they deserve, because these things really deserve their own segment. Oh, and sorry for the food puns, I just couldn't resist. From the immediate moment this game starts, I love how just like the original, the intro immediately gives you the gist of everything that you need to know about the characters and your objective as the player to save Nugget. You already know who the characters and villains are, and you already know how much of a jerk Dr. Fetus is, and the title screen got me so hyped when I first saw it. The raw energy of it is amazing, and the announcer coming back for the forever portion of the title just feels so satisfying to hear for the first time.
Super Meat Boy Forever!
The new art style present is such an upgrade in my opinion, I'm a huge fan of it. The thicker outlines on the characters make them way more appealing to me, and the returning characters themselves also have newly updated redesigns as well. I like the redesigns infinitely more than the originals at the same time. When you unlock the classic versions of the main 3, it really shows how dated the original Super Meat Boy was, especially since you get to see them side by side. One of my favorite things about the new art style is how it's able to convey the environments and expressions of the world. This isn't just limited to the backgrounds, but it also applies to the characters themselves. The cutscenes that showcase the story also do an amazing job at showing the emotions and expressions of the characters, especially through the facial expressions of the new designs. One of my favorite examples is how, through their body language, you can tell how Meat Boy and Bandage Girl act as parents, with Meat Boy being the more protective dad while Bandage Girl is the more fun mom. I also enjoy how most of the cutscenes aren't even accompanied by dialogue. The characters just do what they do, and it's really fun to see the pure chaos that ensues. Within the story itself, my favorite thing not related to Meat Boy and Bandage Girl's adventure was how they implemented the forest animals from the first world, Chipper Grove, into the story. I was shocked because in the original game it was just an occasional joke that popped in at certain moments, but here they gave the forest animals a story that also intertwined with the main protagonists, so it was really awesome to see it all unfold. I personally really enjoyed how they handled Squirrel and Manic as the brains and brawn of the misfit group of mammals rebelling against the Doc. Speaking of Manic, it was also really nice to see another of Dr. Fetus's minions rebel against him, similar to Brownie from the original. Even though the animals don't really have much of anything to do against Dr. Fetus, I still rooted for them nevertheless. One thing I also love is how dramatic every single scene of the squirrel was. Like, it was just so over the top, and that just added to the extra personality and expression. Even though Meat Boy and Bandage Girl are still the main protagonists, they're still as basic as ever, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, we shouldn't expect a Shakespeare-esque story from a game about Cube Me. But I still really like how they got little moments like the one I mentioned earlier to get a bit more fleshed out as characters. So, instead, I want to take some time to talk about my favorite pair, Nugget and Dr. Fetus. It seems super ironic at first too, because to the Doc, Nugget is just an annoyance at the beginning, and he most likely only kidnapped her just to make Meat Boy and Bandage Girl's lives harder. But the way he slowly accepts Nugget is actually the most adorable thing to me. Even a guy who hates everything and everyone became a god and made everyone's life a living hell couldn't resist Nugget. Dr. Fetus is also one of my favorite villains in fiction, and the way they handled him here is really nice, and it makes me appreciate his character even more. One thing I really like with the writing and graffiti in some of the stages is that it projects his inner thoughts. He writes stuff like, "Meat Boy's a dumb loser," and even places stuff like graphics of him with buff arms saying hero to boost his own already massive ego. Hell, he even has a king's throne that he sits in, which I totally didn't call, by the way. But regardless, in the end, he's still a hateful, angry, destructive, egotistical maniac that is just really, really lonely. Like, come on, get this man a friend. Oh wait, that's Nugget. Nugget also feels naturally set in the story, even though there are only a few additions besides just her. I especially like how her design acts as a perfect mix of both of her parents, with their general color schemes being represented. I think it was pretty adorable to see her in a lot of scenes too, because it helped add a ton of extra humor to the banter between the main characters. Like I said, I really like how the bond between her and Dr. Fetus develops. It's adorable, but it's not much more, and that's okay. When all the characters collide in the final battle that results in the other side being created, it's such a crazy set of events, and it really puts the entire conflict on its head. I mean, Dr. Fetus becomes a god. Like, dude, this is wild. Meat Ninja and Bandage Ripper are so hype, and Meat Ninja being adapted from the original is so cool. With this crazy twist, anything can happen at this point, and also, they brought Brownie back for this part. And I'm a huge fan of this. His outfit rocks. And the fact that you can also race Brownie is so good too. The race itself is raw as hell, but feels super rewarding to beat. Plus you get rewarded with one of my personal favorite cutscenes in this entire game. The visual design of the other side easily makes it my favorite looking area in the game. The way the colors switch and warp is just so satisfying to look at, and the way it contorts in each level keeps you guessing. I don't really know what else to say, but good lord I love the aesthetic of this area. I can't imagine how hard it was to design some of these backgrounds too. The ending and final boss fight against Omega Alpha is one of the coolest parts of the game. It's so cinematic, and I'll be discussing some of the boss fights in the gameplay portion itself, so instead I'll conclude the story section here. The ending was so satisfying to see for the first time too. I love how Dr. Fetus quote-unquote gets mellowed out. I love how the wholesome Nugget moment is interrupted without warning. I love how Meat Boy and Bandage Girl part ways with the forest animals. I love how Dr. Fetus gets that disapproving glare from Meat Boy. I love how Nugget looks back and waves. Man, I just really love this ending. It's so good. Sorry I'm fanboying so much, but if you wanted my raw thoughts on it, that's what they are. I love this ending and the cutscenes so much. Hell, I love all the other cutscenes too. And I'll fully admit, when I saw them for the first time, I had such a dumb, fun smile on my face because I had so much fun seeing the antics of these characters. Honestly, all these little things can't help but make me smile, and to finish this part off, I loved all of it. I remember when the gameplay for this game was unveiled for the first time. So many fans were negative or at least extremely critical about it, which is understandable at first glance. The original is really well known for its high amount of control and precision, and the auto-runner aspect being a major part of Forever at first made it seem like the player would not have nearly as much control and the game would kind of hold your hand with its simpler gameplay because of it. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. The gameplay has less buttons than the original, only having 2 buttons you need to focus on at all times. The console that I played it on, which is the Nintendo Switch, has B and down as its 2 buttons. B is used for both the jump and the normal attack, and down can be used for the dive in midair or a slide on the ground. Already, this is a far cry from the original just from the fact that you can actually attack in this game instead of just dodging all the time, and the dive attack acts as an extra air attack if you run out of attacks. The simple control scheme also makes way for levels to introduce some wild gimmicks in each world of the game, and the game gets progressively more complex throughout each world of it, but the difficulty still feels natural at the same time. I really enjoyed how the gimmicks themselves are introduced in the world, and you do progressively more complex things with them. Eventually, when you reach the boss of each world, the fights themselves also implement that respective quirk. You already know how that gimmick works by that point. For example, the fight against a Lab Guardian has used the metallic bug enemies that you've been encountering against it by hitting the targets to disable a shield and give him those hands. In regards to the bosses themselves, they're far from perfect, but they're a massive step up from the original. Then again, the original wasn't really that hard to beat anyway. But still, with the game utilizing your ability to actually fight back this time around, the bosses feel like real fights now instead of just a minute or two of hopping around. My favorite things about the bosses is that they often have ways you can speed them up or often skip a phase entirely, so the experience is way more engaging as a whole. You can also play it safe if you don't want to risk it as well, so it has a way better balance than the original game, which had massive emphasis on you waiting if you went too fast for it. Or in Littlehorn's case, you just jumped there a few times and just stood there in one place. Why is this even a boss fight? Next, I'll be talking about the Dark World levels that are present, because they're definitely some of the craziest levels in the game. They're unlocked very similarly to the original by beating the part-time and the Light World level, and they're harder than the original version of the level too. They ramp up the precision required, and they're a huge feat to tackle. Generally, I think the Dark World levels are harder than the ones from the original, and the way the levels are generated show that heavily. The way the levels are made are through individual chunks, and each time you start a new game, you get a new seed if you didn't enter one, which will give you different levels each time. This is a game changer, because it effectively makes the game a roguelike each time you start a new file, and it's really fun experiencing new seeds. Just like I alluded to before, one of the core parts of the original Super Meat Boy was its sense of speed and control, and I feel Forever emulates that in its own way really well. Throughout most of the chunks, you can sometimes find gaps in it that save time. These are called skips, and they're insanely fun to perform, and a lot of them tend to save a lot of time to help unlock the Dark World stages. You can also quickly tell when a skip is either intentional or unintentional, and plus, they feel insanely good to do, and give this game a great sense of pace. I'd get in a zone when playing certain levels and seeing how well I can blitz through them, because it's so satisfying to master them with these in mind. One last bit about the normal levels that I want to talk about is my favorite world, Zero X Dead Beef. It's the final world you unlock and acts as the post-game world similar to the Cotton Alley from the original. And just like the Cotton Alley, it acts as the ultimate test of your skills and techniques from the previous 5 worlds. It has 6 levels like every other one, but the 6th one is like a mashup of everything possible, and it's honestly insane, but I really love seeing the satisfying new segments and playing them for myself. On that note, I really love Dead Beef's gimmick of switching between 2 different states of the world, and considering that this is a simulation and Dr. Fetus' computer, it makes sense that you'd want to trip you up like that. The background of him typing when you switch never gets old either. My only real problem with this world is how ridiculously long some of the chunks are. Sometimes it feels like overkill, but honestly it's still great. In conclusion, I really enjoy the gameplay of this game. It's insanely fun and precise, and some chunks aren't as enjoyable as others, but that's okay. I also really love how the game's routes you need to take become more complex over time, forcing you to think about how you need to even find where to go. It's really cool how some of the returning gimmicks from the original game make you use them differently too, because of the auto-running. I'm so happy I can also finally answer the question of, is the auto-running taking away from the control of the game? No, it's actually adding its own unique spin on how you even play the game, and it makes it really entertaining for its own type of value. And if you don't like it, that's fine, but there's a lot of people that unnecessarily hated on it, and that just really pisses me off. It's just like, why would you just throw away all this when you could try something new like that? So, just try it for yourself if you haven't, it's really good. For this 3-parter, the fan service is up first, and holy hell there's a lot of fan service. So I'll start with the playable characters and warp zones. The playable characters weren't in the gameplay category, and that's because they all play the same except for Tofu Boy, who's terrible as usual. But I actually really like this change, because it keeps everyone balanced, and you don't have to have a situation like in the original, where most characters straight up can't do certain levels, or certain characters are just stupidly OP. Plus, you have more options at the same time because of the fact that you can now play as any character in boss fights. I also personally like the newer roster more, because even though I love the collaborations from Super Meat Boy and its Flash version, I cannot deny that they relied on indie cameos. With the new roster, there aren't any other indie game cameos, but I really like how it gives the world of Super Meat Boy its own identity, especially playing as some characters like Squirrel and Manic. And granted, I mean, I love the original roster, plus Commander Video isn't in this game, so that's pretty sad, but still, Dr. Fetus is in it, so honestly that perfectly makes up for it. On the opposite end of originality, we have the Warp Zones and Warp Zone characters, which in this game I find way more fun and enjoyable. Unlike the original, which were just extra levels with lives, these feel way more like minigames. My favorite part about these are how they're all a parody of a specific retro video game, with the gameplay of that being emulated too. Let me tell you, I had no information or spoilers on the Warp Zones going in, so when I found my first one, I did not know what to expect, and when I first saw that Punch-Out style screen, my jaw dropped. I was so hyped, and I even yelled, "What game am I even playing anymore?" It was just so cool to see that for the first time. And I love all the little details they put into the Warp Zone minigames, like having Dr. Fetus be a biased referee, and counting in decimals, to the Larrys exploding when you win a round, to Little Horn being in the background of M0. And it gets even better because how you unlock the characters actually correlates to the game you're playing. So for example, with Little Meat in Punch-Out, you have to hit the Bull Charge on Chad to unlock Little Meat, which is a reference to Punch-Out. So it's a really cool thing with how they include these references and make it really feel like you're playing a true parody. And plus there's so many cool little references of the game they're parodying. For example, Toasty from Mortal Kombat, Mega Bandage mimicking the abilities of Mega Man, and way more. There's just so many references that if I mentioned all of them, we'd be here all day. Another major part of this game is its soundtrack, and dude, I'm in love with it. The tracks often have the high energy mixed with the gameplay, and it's so satisfying hearing the new instruments as well. Ridiculon really killed it when making this soundtrack, and there's a few specific songs that I want to give a shout out. The intense guitars of Utter Catastrophe makes this fight way more intimidating and makes me really hyped for it, despite only hearing it for 7 or so seconds if you know what you're doing. I love how the percussion of Wagyu Finger helps create the overwhelming atmosphere as you play through the Dark Clinic. The piano present in Nobody's Gyro is such a great way to make the lab have an even more mysterious and eerie atmosphere, which also fits with the gimmicks of the lab too, considering how weird they are. Make No Mistake has such a great mixture of dips with the bass guitar and the main guitar to enhance the raw tension of the final Dark World. Lastly, my favorite song in the game is Clutch from Zero X Dead Beef. I love how it implements a lot of retro style sounds, which feels especially satisfying when paired with the visuals of the world. You might even say Dr. Fetus is probably playing this on his MP3 player. These are only some of my favorite tracks. Truth be told, I really love every track here, and the higher emphasis on guitar only makes me love it more. It's a major upgrade from the newer Super Meat Boy soundtrack in my opinion, because it generally feels more consistent while feeling diverse at the same time. To end this entire thing off, I had to inevitably make comparisons to the original Super Meat Boy since this is a sequel, but I still fully believe that this game is a worthy successor to the original, and even stands on its own merits. The game had me excited at every cutscene, twist, and little detail with a giddy smile on my face the entire time. And experiencing it all was and still is so fun. The new art style is such a joy, and seeing these characters interact in these new ways made me enjoy almost every bit of this. The gameplay is so exciting and it still has a really nice sense of speed and momentum. Hell, I'm even considering trying to speedrun this game eventually. The new routes, moves, and obstacles complete it, and it really feels rewarding to S-rank all these new stages perfectly. Finally, you can feel the love and attention put into this game through references, sound design, the entire OST as a whole. The amount of references in this game is amazing, and the more I play, the more I discover. To top it all off, it's such a tease seeing the Dr. Fetus will return text at the end. It's such a Marvel-style tease, and I'm so hyped to see what the little doctor that's not a doctor will do next. Thanks for watching, and thanks for even getting this far. This was such a unique review for me to write, considering that I wanted to get all my excitement and passion for this game out there. If the amount of fan art I made didn't give it away, then this video definitely did. Overall, it was an awesome experience, and I don't regret any of it. Stay safe, guys, and see you in the next video. Bye!